A powerful and ruthless businessman ties his elderly and sick father to a tree. Alone in the darkness of the forest, weak and surrounded by the gleaming eyes of hungry maned wolves, old Antonio whispers his final prayers. But when the predators begin to approach, something so extraordinary, so impossible happens that it would defy all laws of nature. Something that exactly 2 years later would bring the powerful son to his knees upon discovering a truth that would destroy everything he thought he knew about that terrible night. Before we begin the story, if you find yourself inspired by emotional narratives, I invite you to become part of our community. Hit that subscribe button now, because stories like this have the power to transform hearts. The storm descended upon the Appalachian Mountains as if the very sky protested what was about to unfold. Lightning sliced through the darkness in ghostly flashes, momentarily illuminating the imposing modern mansion that starkly contrasted with the surrounding rural landscape. Inside that fortress of glass and steel, a 55-year-old man nervously adjusted his Italian tie while observing his reflection in the marble bathroom mirror. Thomas Sterling was the embodiment of American success, at least the kind measured in bank accounts and corporate power. CEO of Sterling Holdings, he had transformed his father's small hardware store into a billion-dollar empire. His cold blue eyes, a legacy from a German great-grandmother, contrasted with his impeccably cut dark hair. The angular face bore the marks of decades dedicated to ruthless business, where compassion was seen as weakness. "It's time," he murmured to himself, checking the gold Rolex on his wrist. It was 11:47 at night. Downstairs, old Arthur Sterling slept restlessly in his recliner, surrounded by medical equipment, monitoring his vital signs. At 83, the family patriarch was battling early-stage Alzheimer's, alternating moments of crystal-clear lucidity with periods of mental confusion. But there was something that remained intact in his fragmented mind: the ability to judge the moral character of his son's actions. "Mr. Sterling," Rogerio, the head of security, his voice was low through the intercom. "Everything is prepared according to your instructions." Thomas gazed at his reflection once more. For a brief instant, something seemed to waver in his eyes. Perhaps a last vestige of conscience, but that was all it was. An instant. He adjusted his Armani jacket and walked out of the bathroom with determined steps. The room where his father rested was dark, lit only by the LEDs of the medical devices and the occasional lightning flashes that invaded through the panoramic windows. The old man breathed heavily, his chest rising and falling under the plaid wool blanket. The same one his late wife had knitted decades ago. "Dad," Thomas whispered, approaching. "It's time for your last ride." Arthur slowly opened his eyes, the initial confusion quickly replaced by a disturbing clarity. His brown eyes, still lively despite his age, fixed on his son with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Thomas, my son," the hoarse voice carried a dignity that the years had failed to steal. "What are you planning to do?" "Solve a problem," Thomas replied coldly, signaling for Rogerio and another guard to enter. "You've become an obstacle to the business. Your antiquated ideas about ethics and environmental preservation are costing the company millions." The two men lifted the old man with professional efficiency, devoid of gentleness. Arthur didn't resist, but his eyes never left his son's face. "They're not antiquated ideas, Thomas. They're values, the same ones I tried to teach you when you were a boy helping me at the store. Values don't pay the bills." Thomas exploded, the mask of coldness momentarily cracking. "Values don't build empires." A particularly violent thunderclap shook the mansion, and the lights flickered briefly. At that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows in the hallway. Mrs. Gable, the 72-year-old housekeeper who had served the Sterling family for over 5 decades. Her wide eyes caught the scene, and she silently retreated, her heart pounding under her simple uniform. Mrs. Gable had cared for Thomas as a baby, seen him take his first steps, comforted his boyhood tears. Seeing that cold, calculating man in place of the affectionate child she had known broke her heart. But it was the look of serene resignation on Arthur's face that made her make an impulsive and courageous decision. While the men carried the old man towards the garage, Mrs. Gable slipped out the back door. The torrential rain instantly soaked her uniform, but she knew a shortcut through the woods, a path the local kids had used for generations. If she ran, maybe she could get to the destination she suspected was Thomas's plan before them. The armored SUV, Arthur remained silent between the guards. Thomas drove personally, the windshield wipers fighting against the storm. The route followed a private road leading to the most remote area of the property, where civilization gave way to the wilderness. "Remember when you taught me to drive on this same road?" Thomas broke the silence, his voice tinged with an incomprehensible bitterness. "I remember," Arthur replied softly. "You were 16, your hands were shaking on the wheel, you were so nervous." "I was weak." Thomas tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You and Mom raised me weak. I had to learn to be strong, on my own. Strength without compassion is just brutality in disguise, son." The car stopped abruptly. Through the rain-streaked windshield, a century-old tree stood alone in the middle of an open field. It was a giant oak, over 100 years old, its twisted branches creating ghostly shapes against the stormy sky. "Get out," Thomas ordered. The guards dragged Arthur out of the vehicle. The cold rain instantly drenched his pajamas, sticking the thin fabric to his frail body. But there was something majestic in the way the old man raised his head, allowing the water to wash over his face. "Is this where you plan to leave me?" Arthur asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "The coyotes in this area are hungry," Thomas replied, avoiding his father's gaze. "Last year's drought decimated their natural prey. They've become opportunistic." Rogerio was already preparing the ropes, but his hands hesitated for a moment. He had a father, a grandfather. His boss's order weighed on his conscience like lead. "Hurry up," Thomas yelled, the rain running down his face like tears he was incapable of shedding. As they tied Arthur to the oak tree, the old man kept his eyes closed, his lips moving silently. An attentive observer would notice he was praying, not for himself but for the son who was betraying him. "Our Father who art in heaven." The words were muffled by the storm, but they carried a strength that transcended the downpour. It was then that Mrs. Gable emerged from the woods, breathless and soaked. She hid behind nearby bushes, horror gripping her features as she confirmed her worst fears. But something in Arthur's posture, that serene acceptance mixed with unwavering faith, gave her the courage to act. The first howl cut through the night like a blade. Soon others joined in, creating a wild symphony that made the guards exchange nervous glances. The coyotes were coming. "Let's go," Thomas ordered, already walking back to the car. "It's done." But it wasn't. As the SUV disappeared into the darkness, leaving Arthur tied and seemingly condemned, two forces converged on that spot. Mrs. Gable, moved by love and loyalty, and the hungry pack, guided by instinct. What would happen when those paths crossed? Would defy all logic and open space for something many would call a miracle. The storm roared, the coyotes approached, and Arthur Sterling, tied to that century-old tree, continued his silent prayer, not asking for salvation, but forgiveness for the son who had abandoned him. And somewhere between heaven and earth, between the storm and the calm, something extraordinary began to take shape. The rain whipped mercilessly against Mrs. Gable's face as she stumbled across the muddy field. Each step was a battle against the biting wind and the slippery ground. But the image of Arthur tied to that tree pushed her forward. Her 72 years weighed like lead in her bones, but a greater force was moving her tired body, the fee. Same force that had made her care for that family for 5 decades. The howls of the coyotes grew in intensity, echoing through the mountains like a ghostly choir. Mrs. Gable knew those sounds well. She had grown up on that land and knew the pack was organizing for the hunt. Time was her enemy now. Meanwhile, tied to the trunk of the century-old oak, Arthur Sterling maintained a serenity that defied the circumstances. The rain streamed down his wrinkled face, mixing with tears he didn't try to hold back. But they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of compassion for the son who had lost his way. "Forgive him, Lord," he murmured, his trembling lips forming, words the wind carried away. "He doesn't know what he's doing. Ambition has blinded his heart, but I know deep down the kind boy I raised is still there." A lightning flash illuminated the field, revealing shadowy forms moving among the low vegetation. The coyotes had arrived. The first one emerged from the darkness, an impressive alpha male with reddish-gold fur and eyes that glowed like embers in the night. Others followed, forming a semicircle around the tree. Mrs. Gable, still about 50 yards away, felt her blood run cold. It was too late. The predators had already found their prey. But something strange happened then, something that would make the housekeeper question everything she thought she knew about the natural world. The alpha coyote approached Arthur slowly, but instead of expected aggression, there was curiosity in its posture. The animal tilted its head, sniffing the air around the old man. The other coyotes remained still, as if awaiting a signal from their leader. Arthur opened his eyes and met the coyote's gaze. For a moment that seemed eternal, man and animal stared at each other. There was something familiar in those wild eyes, something that touched a distant memory in the old man's heart. "You," Arthur whispered, understanding illuminating his face. "You're descended from her, aren't you? From the female I saved so many years ago." As if understanding the words, the coyote came closer, its muzzle almost touching Arthur's tied hand. It was then that Mrs. Gable, gathering all her courage, emerged from her hiding place. "Mr. Sterling," she cried, stumbling forward. The pack immediately turned to the new presence, teeth bared and fur bristling. But the alpha coyote let out a low growl, not directed at Mrs. Gable, but at its companions. It was a clear command. "Back down." "Mrs. Gable," Arthur murmured, surprised. "My dear Mrs. Gable, you shouldn't be here." The housekeeper ignored the comment, her trembling hands already working at the knots that bound the old man. The ropes were soaked and tight, resisting her arthritic fingers. "Hush and let me save you," she grumbled through clenched teeth, fear giving way to determination. "I raised both of you. I won't let it end like this." The alpha coyote watched the scene with what could be interpreted as interest. The other pack members kept a respectful distance, as if understanding that something extraordinary was happening. "How didn't they attack?" Mrs. Gable asked as she struggled with the last knot. "They should be starving." Arthur smiled weakly. 20 years ago, I saved a pregnant female coyote from illegal hunters. I created a small sanctuary to protect her and her pups. This must be one of her descendants." "You and your stories," Mrs. Gable murmured, but there was admiration in her voice. Finally, the last knot gave way. Arthur stumbled, his numb legs barely able to support him. Mrs. Gable put his arm over her shoulders, supporting his weight. It was an almost comical scene. Two elderly people leaning on each other in a torrential downpour, surrounded by a pack of coyotes that inexplicably didn't attack. "We need to get out of here," Mrs. Gable said. "My house isn't far. We can hide there." But Arthur hesitated, turning back to the alpha coyote. The animal kept its gaze fixed on him, and there was something almost human in that silent exchange. "Thank you," Arthur whispered to the coyote. "Your ancestor gave me a chance to do good. Now you give me a chance to forgive." As if understanding, the coyote lowered its head slightly before turning and disappearing into the darkness, the pack following silently. The journey to Mrs. Gable's house was an ordeal. The rain showed no mercy, turning the path into a river of mud. Several times Arthur stumbled, his body weakened by age and the ordeal. But Mrs. Gable was there, firm as a rock, refusing to let him fall. "You were always stubborn," Arthur observed with a tired smile. "And you were always too kind for your own good," she retorted. "Now save your breath. We still have a ways to go." Mrs. Gable's house finally appeared through the curtain of rain, a modest brick construction with a small garden in front. A faint light shone in the kitchen window. "Anna!" Mrs. Gable called as she pushed the door open. "Anna, come quick!" A young woman of about 30 appeared in the hallway, her eyes widening at the scene. Anna, Mrs. Gable's daughter, was a nurse, specializing in geriatrics, recently returned from New York where she had furthered her studies. "Mom, what? Mr. Sterling?" She recognized the old man immediately. "What happened?" "I'll explain later," Mrs. Gable cut in. "Now help me get him to the guest room. He needs dry clothes and medical attention." While Anna examined Arthur, checking vital signs and injuries, Mrs. Gable prepared hot tea and blankets. The simple house transformed into an improvised refuge, protecting not only from the storm outside, but also from the greater storm forming in human relationships. "His injuries are superficial," Anna announced after the examination, "but there are signs of mild hypothermia. He needs to warm up and rest. And we need to decide what to do," Mrs. Gable added, sitting heavily in a chair. "Thomas, what he did, we can't just—" "We're not doing anything," Arthur interrupted softly. "Not for now." "What do you mean, nothing?" Mrs. Gable exploded. He was going to leave you." "I know what he did," Arthur held the housekeeper's hand. "But I know my son. Guilt must already be eating away at his soul. True punishment doesn't come from outside, Mrs. Gable. It comes from within." Anna watched the interaction with growing admiration. This man, who had just escaped a terrible situation orchestrated by his own son, spoke of forgiveness and compassion. "You're extraordinary," she murmured. "No," Arthur shook his head. "I'm just a father who hasn't given up believing his son can find his way back to the light." Outside, the storm began to subside. The sound of rain against the roof gradually diminished, as if nature itself recognized that the worst had passed. But everyone in the small house knew that the real storm, the one forming in Thomas Sterling's heart, was just beginning. "Tomorrow," Arthur said, closing his tired eyes, "we'll start planning. Not revenge, but redemption." Mrs. Gable and Anna exchanged glances. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but there was something in that man's unwavering faith that made them believe miracles were still possible. And somewhere in the mountains, a pack of coyotes ran free under the dissipating rain, having fulfilled a role that transcended their wild nature, as if they were instruments of a greater force, orchestrating the events of that extraordinary night. 2 years passed like pages of a book slowly turned by the wind. In Mrs. Gable's modest house, on the outskirts of town, a quiet routine had been established. The garden, once merely functional, now bloomed under Arthur's patient care, the old man having found gardening a form of therapy for body and soul. Every morning he woke before the sun, brewed fresh coffee, and sat on the small back porch. With a rosary in his hands, the same one that had belonged to his late wife Eleanor, he maintained his sacred ritual. They weren't mechanical prayers, but intimate conversations with the divine, always including pleas for Thomas's redemption. "Lord," he murmured that specific morning, 2 years after that fateful night, "grant my son the grace to see beyond the blindness of ambition. May he find his way back before it's too late." Anna, who was preparing for another day's work at the local clinic, watched the old man from the kitchen window. She had developed deep admiration for this man whose faith remained unshaken despite the betrayal he had suffered. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," she greeted, joining him with her own cup of coffee. "Sleep well." "Like an angel," he replied with a serene smile. "Today I feel something different in the air, Anna, as if changes are coming." The young nurse had learned to respect the old man's intuitions. In 2 years of living together, she had witnessed his wisdom and sensitivity to perceive nuances that escaped others. "Hope they're good changes," she commented, adjusting her white uniform. Meanwhile, in the heart of Manhattan, in his office on the 40th floor of a mirrored building, Thomas Sterling stared at devastating financial reports. The man who 2 years before exuded confidence and power now showed visible signs of deterioration. Deep circles marked his face, his once impeccable hair showed premature gray strands, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the documents. "Mr. Sterling," his secretary entered hesitantly, "Mr. Thompson is here for the meeting." Thomas nodded distractedly. The lawyer entered, his grim expression anticipating bad news. "The situation has worsened." Thompson went straight to the point. "The injunction on the Mountain View project has been upheld. The environmental irregularities are undeniable. We're talking about fines that could reach 50 million. 50 million, Thomas repeated, stunned. It was the third project enjoined in 2 years. "How did we get to this?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "Thomas, I need to be frank. Since the incident with your father, nothing has gone right. It's as if there's a curse on your business." "A curse?" Thomas exploded, but his anger sounded hollow. "I don't believe in that nonsense." However, deep down, a persistent voice whispered in his conscience. The nightmares that tormented him, every night, always the same scene. His father tied to the tree, looking at him with infinite compassion while coyotes circled. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. That same afternoon, in a discreet cafe downtown, David Miller, an environmental prosecutor, reviewed a voluminous dossier. He had been investigating Sterling Holdings for 3 years, but the recent evidence was particularly revealing. "Fascinating," he murmured, analyzing satellite photos. All this destruction in a protected area, and he thought no one would notice. That's when he saw her, Anna, entering the cafe, still in uniform, looking around for someone. Their eyes met and something passed between them, a spark of mutual recognition. "Excuse me," David approached. "You're Anna, right? Mrs. Gable's daughter?" "Yes," she replied, surprised. "Have we met?" "I'm David Miller. I'm investigating some companies in the region for environmental crimes. Your mother provided valuable information about certain rural properties." Anna felt a shiver. She knew this moment would eventually come. "Maybe we should talk," she suggested, indicating a more secluded table. The conversation that followed would change the course of many lives. Anna, after ensuring David would keep it confidential, revealed the truth about Arthur Sterling's whereabouts. The prosecutor listened in silence, his face displaying various emotions: shock, indignation, admiration. "He's alive," David repeated, still processing. "And he chose not to report his son. Mr. Sterling believes that true justice doesn't come from external punishments, but from internal transformation," Anna explained. "He has been patiently waiting for Thomas to find his own path to redemption." David shook his head, impressed. "That's an extraordinary perspective. But the environmental crimes continue, people are being harmed." "I know," Anna lowered her eyes. "That's why I'm talking to you now. Maybe it's time for a different kind of intervention." Meanwhile, in the mansion that once symbolized his success, Thomas dined alone. The immense table, capable of seating 20 people, now served only him. His wife Sarah had left 6 months earlier, taking their teenage children. "I can't live with a man who has lost his soul," were her parting words. The silence in the house was oppressive. Even the staff worked, quietly avoiding eye contact. Everyone suspected the truth about old Mr. Sterling's disappearance, but no one dared to comment. Thomas's cell phone vibrated, text message from an unknown number. "Your father always believed in the power of forgiveness. There is still time." He dropped his fork, his hands trembling violently. Who would know? Who could know? More messages arrived in the following days, always cryptic, always mentioning forgiveness and redemption. Thomas started drinking more, trying to drown the guilt that consumed him, but the alcohol only made the nightmares worse. On a particularly difficult night, after waking up screaming from the recurring nightmare, Thomas did something he hadn't done in decades. He knelt by his bed and tried to pray. The words didn't come easily. There was rust in his abandoned faith. I don't know how to do this anymore," he whispered to the emptiness. "Dad, if you can hear me, forgive me." At the same instant, miles away, Arthur woke up startled. Anna, who was spending the night at home after a shift, ran to his room. "Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. The old man had tears in his eyes, but he was smiling. "He asked for forgiveness, Anna. My boy finally asked for forgiveness." "How do you know?" "A father knows." Arthur touched his chest. "In here, you feel it. The change has begun." Events accelerated after that night. David Miller, moved by Anna's story and the unsustainable situation of the environmental crimes, decided on an unconventional approach. Instead of simply indicting Thomas, he began leaving clues about the possibility of a settlement, reparation instead of punishment, transformation instead of destruction. "It's irregular," he admitted to Anna during one of their meetings, which had become frequent. "But there are precedents for restorative justice. If he's genuinely willing to change..." Thomas, in turn, felt the walls closing in. His business collapsing, his family destroyed, his conscience in torment. The anonymous messages continued, each one a reminder that someone somewhere knew his guilt. It was then that the incident occurred that would change everything. During a health crisis for Arthur, pneumonia that worsened quickly, Anna rushed him to the hospital. While doctors fought to stabilize him, the old man in the midst of a fever had a moment of impressive lucidity. "Call Mrs. Gable and Anna," he asked in a weak voice. When both were by his side, he held their hands with surprising strength. "If this is my time, I accept. But I ask one last favor of the Lord." He raised his eyes upward, and his voice gained a firmness that defied his physical condition. "Heavenly Father, if it is your will to take me now, I accept willingly. But I ask only one grace, that my son may see clearly the error of his ways before he repeats the same mistakes with his own children. Not for me, Lord, but for him and for future generations." At that exact moment, the machines monitoring his vital signs registered a sudden improvement. The fever began to subside, his breathing normalized. The doctors, experienced and skeptical, found no medical explanation for the abrupt recovery. "It's impossible," murmured Dr. Smith, head of the ICU. He was on the verge of respiratory failure. Anna and Mrs. Gable exchanged emotional glances. They had witnessed something that transcended conventional medicine. News of the miraculous recovery spread through the hospital. Among the regular visitors was Carmen, a former employee of Sterling Holdings, who kept in touch with Sarah, Thomas's ex-wife. Through this network of connections, the information reached Thomas in a distorted form. They said a mysterious old man in the hospital had miraculously recovered after praying for the forgiveness of an ungrateful son. The description, even vague, hit Thomas like a lightning bolt. Could it be? After 2 years believing his father was in a ravine, could it be possible that... That night, Thomas didn't sleep. The possibility that his father was alive revolutionized everything he thought he knew. If it was true, it meant Arthur had chosen not to report him, had chosen to forgive the unforgivable. The weight of that realization was too much to bear, alone. For the first time in 2 years, Thomas cried, not tears of self-pity but of genuine repentance. The empire he had built on ambition and cruelty was worth nothing compared to the love of a father he had tried to destroy. Dawn found a transformed man. Thomas knew what he needed to do, even if it meant losing everything he had achieved. Some things were more important than money or power, lessons his father had tried to teach and that he was finally beginning to understand. The morning of October 15th arrived heavy with omens. Thomas Sterling woke up after another sleepless night, but there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that had long been absent. On his nightstand, the envelope he had received the previous evening remained unopened, as if it contained a destiny he still hesitated to approach. The envelope had no sender, just his name written in careful handwriting. It had been delivered personally by a messenger who disappeared before they could question him. Thomas picked it up with trembling hands, finally summoning the courage to open it. 2 years have passed since that night. If you wish to find what you lost, go to the abandoned chapel on your rural property. Midnight. Go alone. The choice to confront the past or continue running is yours. The chapel. Thomas hadn't thought about it in decades. Built by his great-grandfather, it was in a remote area of the property, abandoned after his mother's death. Eleanor used to take him there as a child for moments of reflection and prayer. Throughout the day, Thomas wrestled with himself. Part of him screamed it was a trap, maybe blackmail. Another part, the one that had recently awakened, whispered that this could be his chance for redemption. At 11:30 p.m. he was in his car, driving down the familiar road leading to the rural property. The full moon illuminated the path as on that fateful night, but there was no storm this time, just an unsettling calm that seemed to foreshadow revelations. The chapel appeared among the trees, its colonial structure resisting time despite the abandonment. Wild vines embraced the walls, and the wooden door creaked in the night wind. Thomas parked and walked slowly, each step echoing in his pounding heart. He pushed the door open and entered. Candles were lit throughout the space, creating dancing shadows on the peeling walls. And there, sitting on the only remaining pew, before the ruined altar, was a figure that made his world stop. "Dad?" The word escaped as a sob. Arthur Sterling was there, real and alive, holding the same rosary Thomas recognized immediately, his mother's. The old man looked up, and in his eyes there was no accusation, only infinite compassion. "Hello, my son." Thomas fell to his knees, his legs unable to support him. 2 years of guilt, repentance, and despair overflowed in uncontrollable tears. "You're alive. How? I thought... Shh." Arthur got up with difficulty and approached his son. "I didn't come here to hear explanations or accusations. I came to offer what you never gave me that night, a second chance." "I don't deserve it," Thomas sobbed, still on his knees. "What I did, it's unforgivable." "Nothing is unforgivable for a truly repentant heart," Arthur replied softly. "Get up, Thomas. We need to talk." It was then that other figures emerged. From the shadows, David Miller was there, his serious face carrying documents. Anna appeared, her hand intertwined with the prosecutor's. Something had blossomed between them during the months of planning. And Mrs. Gable, faithful as ever, watched from the entrance. "I don't understand," Thomas stammered, finally standing but still shaken. "All of you knew?" David stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling, I came here not as a prosecutor, but as someone who was touched by your father's extraordinary compassion. I have here evidence of all the environmental crimes committed by your company in recent years." Thomas paled, but David continued. "Enough to guarantee decades in prison. But I also have an alternative proposal, inspired by the man who chose to forgive the unforgivable." The prosecutor opened a folder, revealing detailed documents. "Restorative justice. Reparation instead of punishment. Your father believes you, can redeem yourself, and he convinced me to give you this chance." "I didn't expect this." Thomas looked at his father, stunned. "After what I did..." Arthur held his son's hands, the rosary still intertwined in his fingers. "Every night, my son, I prayed for you with this rosary. It was your mother's, remember? She always believed that love could transform even the hardest hearts." "Mom." Thomas touched the rosary, memories flooding his mind. "She would be ashamed of what I became." "She would be proud to see you choosing to change," Arthur corrected gently. "There's still time, Thomas. There's always time, as long as we breathe." Anna approached, her voice professional but compassionate. "Mr. Sterling, your father had a health crisis recently. During his recovery, something extraordinary happened. He prayed not for himself, but for you, for your redemption." "That's when everything changed," Mrs. Gable added, her voice hoarse with emotion. "His recovery defied all medical logic. The doctors called it a miracle." Thomas looked at each face, around him. Where he expected to find hate and a desire for revenge, he saw only expectation and a genuine offer of forgiveness. It was more than he could process. What do you want me to do?" David detailed the proposal. "First, immediately halt all projects in protected areas. Second, convert a large part of your rural properties into environmental reserves, especially focused on protecting the coyote population. Third, use your resources to repair the damage caused. Fourth, dedicate yourself personally to community work. And my company? It can continue operating, but under strict environmental supervision and with new ethical principles," David explained. "Your father insisted that destroying you wouldn't bring true justice, transforming you into an instrument of good, yes." The silence that followed was profound. Thomas struggled internally, the old self, proud and unrepentant, battling against the broken man who had discovered the extent of his own monstrosity. "I accept," the words came out as a whisper. "I accept everything, but Dad..." He turned to Arthur. "How can you forgive me? I tried. I was going to leave you." "You are already forgiven, son." Arthur hugged him, and Thomas collapsed in his arms like the child he once was. "I forgave you that night, tied to that tree. I prayed not for salvation, but for you to find your way back." "The coyotes," Thomas suddenly remembered. "What happened to the coyotes?" A smile touched Arthur's lips. That's a story that still moves me. They protected me, Thomas, as if they recognized in me someone who once protected theirs. Nature has mysterious ways of returning good. He's telling the truth, Mrs. Gable confirmed. I saw it with my own eyes. The coyotes formed a circle, but not of attack, of protection. It was supernatural. David checked his watch. It's almost 2 in the morning. We have documents to sign, if you're truly willing to follow this path, Mr. Sterling. Thomas, he corrected. Just Thomas. The man who insisted on titles and formalities died tonight. As they signed the papers that would completely change the course of his life and business, Thomas felt a weight he had carried for 2 years finally dissolve. It wouldn't be easy. There would be skepticism, resistance, moments of doubt. But looking at his father, alive and offering unconditional love after unthinkable betrayal, he knew he had found something more valuable than all the empires in the world. There's one last thing, Arthur said when they finished. Your children. They don't know the truth about that night, but they feel your absence. Sarah is willing to attempt a reconciliation if you prove you've truly changed. My children. Thomas felt a new wave of emotion. I have so much to fix. One step at a time, Anna advised. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. When they left the chapel, the sky was beginning to lighten on the horizon. A new day was dawning, literally and metaphorically. As they walked, a distant howl cut through the air, not threatening but almost unsalutary. They're still there, Arthur observed, looking towards the woods, guarding these hills like silent protectors. Thomas stopped, an idea forming. The Coyote Reserve. Can we make it a research center too? Study these magnificent animals, protect them properly. David and Anna exchanged surprised glances. It was the first time Thomas had proposed something on his own initiative, without it being part of the imposed conditions. That's an excellent idea, Anna agreed, squeezing David's hand. As the group dispersed, each returning to their lives, but now united by bonds deeper than blood or law, Thomas remained for a moment longer with his father. How did you keep the faith, he asked. After everything I did, how did you keep believing I could change? Arthur smiled, that wise smile Thomas remembered from childhood. Because I never forgot the boy you were, the boy who cried when his canary died, who shared his lunch with poor schoolmates, who helped me at the store with such enthusiasm. That boy never died, Thomas. He was just buried under layers of ambition and fear. Fear? Fear of not being good enough, of disappointing, of being vulnerable, Arthur explained. True strength, son, lies in accepting our weaknesses and choosing love over power. Father and son stood there watching the sun rise over the Appalachian Mountains. It was a new beginning, bought not with money or influence, but with genuine repentance and unconditional love. And somewhere in the woods, a pack of coyotes began another day, having fulfilled 2 years earlier a role that transcended their wild nature, being instruments of a greater justice than any human court could provide. 3 months had passed since that transformative encounter in the abandoned chapel. The headquarters of Sterling Holdings, once a symbol of ruthless corporate power, was undergoing visible changes that reflected the interior transformation of its CEO. Luxurious offices gave way to more functional spaces, and part of the executive floor was converted into an environmental sustainability training center. Thomas arrived every morning at 7, no longer in his armored limousine, but in a modest hybrid car. The employees, initially skeptical, were beginning to realize that the change was genuine. The man who once barely greeted his subordinates, now knew each one by name, was interested in their families, listened to their suggestions. Good morning, Mr. Sterling, he greeted his father that specific morning. The old man had insisted on accompanying the company's transformation process, serving as an informal consultant on business ethics. Good morning, son. How was the meeting? With the investors yesterday? Thomas sighed, sitting down. Difficult. Many still don't believe in the change of direction for the company. We lost 2 important contracts. And how do you feel about that? Strangely relieved, Thomas admitted. They were projects that would compromise preservation areas. 2 years ago, I would have done anything to keep them. Now, there are things more important than profit. Arthur smiled proudly. His son was learning slowly but consistently the lessons he had tried to teach throughout his life. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thomas, Mrs. Sarah is here to see you." Thomas's heart pounded. His ex-wife had agreed to talk about a possible reconciliation, but their meetings were always tense, laden with accumulated grievances. Sarah entered, elegant as always in her navy blue pantsuit, but there was a softness in her eyes that had long been absent. A renowned doctor, she had maintained her dignified composure throughout the separation, protecting their children from the worst of the truth. "Thomas, Mr. Sterling," she greeted both of them. "How are you?" "Well, dear," Arthur replied, getting up. "I'll leave you to talk privately." When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence settled. It was Sarah who broke it first. "Olivia and James ask about you constantly," she said, referring to their teenage children. "I told them you're going through important changes, trying to become a better person." "And them? What did they say?" "James is skeptical. 18 years. Old and already cynical, like you used to be," she corrected gently. "But Olivia wants to see you. She's only 16, she still believes in second chances." Thomas felt his eyes well up. "I messed everything up, didn't I? With you, with my dad, with everyone?" "Yes," Sarah was direct. "But the man I met 20 years ago, the one who won me, over with his passion for building beautiful things, not just profitable ones. I've seen glimpses of him lately." "You've been watching me?" She blushed slightly. "News gets around. The new environmental reserve, the social projects, the change in company policy, and Anna keeps me informed." "Anna and David are engaged," Thomas commented. "Strange how something good was born out of so much pain." "Life has its ironies," Sarah agreed. "Thomas, I'm willing to try. Slowly, with family therapy, no promises, but only if the change is real and permanent." "It's real," he stated with conviction. "More real than anything I built before." That weekend, an event would profoundly mark Thomas's journey of transformation. The official inauguration of the Eleanor Sterling Environmental Reserve, named in honor of his mother, brought together environmentalists, authorities, and curious onlookers. What would have been just another networking opportunity transformed into a genuine celebration of renewal. David Miller, now not just a prosecutor, but Mrs. Gable's future son-in-law, spoke about restorative justice and the power of redemption. Anna coordinated the medical team that offered free health care to local residents. And Mrs. Gable, emotional, saw her extended family, because that's how she considered all of them, united in a common purpose. But the most touching moment came when an unexpected delegation arrived, elders from the nearby Cherokee village, led by Chief Stone Bear. "We came to thank you," the old leader said in slow English. "For years, we feared for the sacred forest. Now it is protected." Thomas, who once saw indigenous people as obstacles to progress, knelt respectfully before the chief. "Forgiveness for what my greed almost destroyed. I promise I will be a guardian, not a destroyer." The chief touched his head in a silent blessing. Among the delegation, an elderly woman approached Arthur. "You are the man of the coyotes," she said simply. "The spirits of the forest speak of your kindness." Arthur's eyes widened. "How do you know about the coyotes?" "That stormy night I was gathering medicinal herbs. I saw the sacred light around you, and the four-legged guardians who protected you. It was not coincidence. It was answer to your life's prayers." The mystical moment was interrupted by children's shouts. Olivia and James had arrived with Sarah. The girl ran straight to her father, hugging him without hesitation. James kept his distance, watching cautiously. "Dad!" Olivia exclaimed. "The reserve is beautiful. I saw 3 coyotes on the way." "Really?" Thomas hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "Maybe they came to say hello." James finally approached. "Mom says you've changed, that you're not the man who abandoned us for money." The accusation stung, but it was fair. "I'm not, son. Or at least, I'm trying not to be. I know words aren't enough. I need to prove it with actions." "Is Grandpa really alive?" the boy asked abruptly. "I heard conversations. They say something terrible happened 2 years ago." Thomas looked at Sarah, who nodded subtly. It was time for some truth, adapted to their age. "Yes, he's alive. There was so serious misunderstanding between us. I made terrible choices, son. But your grandfather forgave me, and now I'm trying to earn that forgiveness." Arthur approached, having overheard the conversation. "James, Olivia, come here." The grandchildren ran to hug him. The old man held them close, his voice thick with emotion. "Your parents have been through difficult times, but true love overcomes everything. You are living proof of that." During the event, something extraordinary happened. As families gathered for the community lunch, a pack of coyotes emerged from the nearby woods, not with aggression, but with calm curiosity, as if they had come to inspect the new guardians of their territory. The largest among them, an imposing male many recognized from photos of the reserve, approached closer. Arthur slowly got up, extending his hand. To everyone's astonishment, the coyote sniffed his fingers before calmly walking away. "It's him," Mrs. Gable whispered, "the same one from that night." A nature photographer present captured the moment. The old man blessed by the coyote, surrounded by his reunited family, with the verdant reserve in the background. The image would become a symbol of the transformation, not just of a man, but of an entire community. That night, in the house he now shared again with Sarah and the children, still in separate rooms, respecting the gradual process, Thomas reflected on the journey. On his nightstand, next to his mother's rosary that his father had given him, was a journal where he recorded thoughts and progress. "Day 92 of the new life," he wrote. "Every day is a battle against the man I was, but each victory, no matter how small, brings me closer to the man my father always knew I could be." The coyotes came back today, not as a threat but as a reminder that nature forgives if we know how to ask for forgiveness. Tomorrow we begin construction of the research center, building not to destroy but to preserve. Mum would be proud. From the next room he heard Olivia talking to Sarah. "Mum, I think Dad is back. The real Dad, the one from your stories." "I think so too, dear," Sarah replied softly. "Sometimes people get lost, but love helps them find their way back." Thomas closed his eyes, the rosary in his hands. For the first time in years, he slept without nightmares. In his dreams, he walked through the reserve beside his father, while coyotes watched them not as predators, but as guardians of a redemption being built day by day, choice by choice. The path was long, but he was no longer alone, and that made all the difference. 2 years passed since the reserve's inauguration, marking 4 years since that fateful night that had changed so many lives. The Eleanor Sterling Environmental Reserve had become an international reference in coyote conservation, attracting researchers from around the world. The research center, built with sustainable architecture that harmonized with the landscape, was directed by Ana, now Dr. Ana Rodriguez, after defending her doctorate in environmental conservation. On that special December morning, the family gathered for an event that symbolized the closing of a cycle. David and Anna would celebrate their wedding in the small chapel, now fully restored by Thomas as a gift to the newlyweds. "Are you nervous?" Mrs. Gable adjusted her daughter's veil, her eyes wet with emotion. "A little," Anna admitted, radiant in her simple but elegant dress. "But it's a good nervous. Who would have thought I'd find love in the midst of so much turmoil?" Arthur entered the room, leaning on a decorative cane more for style than necessity. At 87, he maintained surprising vigor, attributed by many to the inner peace he carried. "You look beautiful, my dear," he said. "Your father would be proud." Anna hugged him. "How you've been a father to me, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for everything." In the chapel, guests took their seats. The transformation of the space was impressive: restored stained glass windows, solid wood pews, wild flowers in delicate arrangements. Thomas supervised the final details, a task he had embraced with personal dedication. Dad, James, now 20 and about to start college for environmental science, approached. "Grandma Eleanor would have loved to see this." "She is seeing it," Thomas replied, touching the rosary in his pocket. "Somehow she is." Sarah joined them, intertwining her arm with Thomas's. The complete reconciliation had taken time, therapy, and much patience, but genuine love had prevailed. They wore their wedding rings again, reaffirmed in an intimate ceremony 6 months prior. "Where's Olivia?" she asked. "Taking photos of the coyotes as usual." James rolled his eyes affectionately. She's been obsessed since she saw that National Geographic article about the reserve. As if summoned, Olivia appeared running, a professional camera around her neck. At 18, she was developing remarkable talent for nature photography. "Dad, Mom, I got the perfect shot. The alpha coyote with the whole pack at sunset." "You can show us later, dear." Sarah adjusted her daughter's hair. "Now it's time for the wedding." The ceremony was simple and touching. David, emotional, could barely contain his tears as he saw Anna walking down the aisle escorted by Arthur. Thomas served as David's best man, a gesture few would have imagined possible years before. "Love," said the officiant, "has the power to transform not just two people, but everyone around them. This union is living proof that from the darkest moments can be born the most beautiful stories." During the vows, Anna included special words. "I promise to love you as Mr. Sterling loves, with unwavering faith, infinite forgiveness, and eternal hope." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel. The reception took place outdoors, under white tents that danced in the breeze. The food, prepared with local organic ingredients, included traditional American dishes that Mrs. Gable had personally supervised. A local bluegrass band livened up the party, with old and young dancing together. Thomas's speech as best man surprised everyone. 4 years ago, I was a man lost in my own arrogance. Today, I celebrate not just the union of two hearts, but the power of forgiveness that made it possible for all of us to be here. David didn't just investigate my crimes, he believed in my redemption. Anna didn't just care for my father. She became the daughter he deserved. And my father, his voice choked up, he taught me that true love never gives up. Arthur stood up, raising his glass of sparkling cider. "To family, not just by blood, but the one we choose with our hearts." The toast was followed by emotional applause. Even the town mayor, present as a guest, seemed touched by the genuineness of the moment. As the sun set, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, something magical happened. A pack of coyotes emerged from the nearby woods, positioning themselves on the adjacent hill. They didn't approach the party, but remained visible like silent guardians. "Look," Olivia pointed excitedly, "it's the whole pack, and there are pups." The alpha coyote, the same one that had protected Arthur years before, raised its head to the sky and let out a long, melancholic howl. Others joined in, creating a wild symphony that silenced the party momentarily. "It's as if they're blessing her union," a guest whispered. Arthur walked slowly towards the animals, stopping at a respectful distance. He raised his hand in greeting, and the alpha coyote tilted its head before leading the pack back into the woods. "Incredible," David murmured, hugging Anna. "Your conservation work has created something special here." "It wasn't just my work," Anna corrected. "It was the transformation of an entire family, a community." The veteran National Geographic photographer, present as a special guest, captured every moment. "This is the story the world needs to hear," he told Thomas. "Not just about environmental conservation, but about the conservation of the human soul." As the night wore on, guests began to leave. Mrs. Gable, tired but radiant, hugged each member of her extended family before retiring. "I lived to see this day," she murmured. "Thank you, Lord." Thomas and Sarah danced slowly. James played guitar for a group of friends, and Olivia showed her photos to the professional photographer, who seemed genuinely impressed. "She has talent," he told Thomas. "If you like, I can recommend her for an internship at the magazine." "That would be amazing," Thomas replied, proud. Arthur, sitting on a bench watching everything, was approached by Chief Stone Bear, who had attended with a small delegation. "The prophecy has been fulfilled," the indigenous leader said enigmatically. "Prophecy?" "The elders spoke of a man who would be tested by the spirits of the forest. If his heart was pure, the four-legged guardians would protect him, and through him many would find redemption." Arthur reflected on the words. "I was just an instrument." "The best instruments don't know they are," the chief smiled. "Your faith moved mountains, white man with an indigenous heart." Close to midnight, when only the closest family remained, Thomas suggested a final walk. Father, children, wife, Anna, and David followed the full moonlit trail leading to the reserve's overlook. From up high, they could see the city lights in the distance, the river winding through the valley, and the preserved forest stretching to the horizon. The night sounds of the forest created a natural soundtrack: crickets, owls, the rustling of leaves. 4 years ago, Thomas began, I almost destroyed all of this. My family, this land, my own soul. But you didn't destroy it, Sarah squeezed his hand. And that's what matters. Forgiveness, Arthur added, doesn't erase the past but transforms the future. Dad, James asked, do you think Grandma Eleanor knew everything would turn out all right? Your grandmother always had faith, Arthur smiled. She used to say God writes straight with crooked lines. A solitary howl cut through the night, followed by others. Somewhere in the woods, the pack claimed its territory, now protected forever. Good thing they didn't let me get eaten, Arthur joked, breaking the solemnity of the moment. I would have missed all this. They laughed together, the sound echoing through the valley. Families can be broken, but true love has the power to rebuild them stronger. Let's head back, Anna suggested. My honeymoon starts tomorrow, but so does research season. Life goes on. As they walked down the trail, Olivia stopped suddenly. Wait, look. In a nearby clearing, illuminated by the moon, a family of coyotes. 2 adults and 3 pups played carefree. The pups rolled in the grass while the parents watched protectively. It's perfect, she whispered, raising her camera. Like life should be, Thomas agreed, hugging his daughter. Wild but protected, free but loved. The click of the camera captured more than an image. It crystallized a moment of perfect harmony between man and nature, forgiveness and redemption, past and future. Upon returning to the house, they found Mrs. Gable waiting with hot chocolate. Thought you might like some, she said simply. Sitting around the kitchen table, sharing the drink and memories, Thomas had an epiphany. This was true wealth. Not bank accounts or properties, but moments like this, surrounded by those he loved, and who loved him despite everything. I've been thinking, he announced. I want to create a foundation in Mom's name, not just for environmental conservation, but for restorative justice programs, so other families can have the chance we had. That's a wonderful idea, Sarah supported. I can help with the legal part, David offered. And I can help with the mental health programs, Anna added. I'll document everything, Olivia piped up. And I'll make the coffee, James joked.